Welcome everyone to the Regional Digital Government Summit. We are absolutely honored to be your co-host this afternoon as we tackle the unique challenges of municipal, provincial, and state-level public services together.
It's an honor to be here with you all today as we engaged in conversation on what's impacting our digital teams at the local level at a global scale. My name is Angelica Quirarte, or Angie, and I'm Deputy Director of the California Office of Digital Innovation as an appointee of Governor Gavin Newsom. In my role, I lead policy, operations, and digital efforts, including managing multidisciplinary teams that collaborate with state entities in solving hard problems and empower public servants to use new approaches by leveraging analytics, user research, content design, and more. For the last year, we've supported the digital response to COVID-19, as many of you have as well, I am sure. And I'm joining from the Nice-Senan territory, which is in Sacramento, the capital of California.
And my name is Skaidra Pujunas, and I serve as a senior advisor at the Ontario Digital Service, a delivery hub within the Ontario provincial government. I work on team engagement, where we are tasked with amplifying, supporting, and highlighting the stories and projects of public servant teams doing the work of creating simpler, accessible, and more intuitive services for everyone, while also encouraging our work to be shared in the open across jurisdictions, from public blogging to cross-jurisdictional show and tells and community forums. I'm joining today on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit in West Toronto, Ontario.
We're glad to have you with us here today as you watch 3 pre-recorded conversations that we've prepared for this regional summit. Now that as you watch the sessions, our speakers will be moderating the chat, but we will also have a 20-minute Q&A at the end of each session. If you hear anything worth sharing about the amazing content that you'll be hearing, please make sure that you use the Forward50 hashtag or @Forward50Conference on Twitter. We'll remind everyone here that there is a code of conduct because we want to make sure that we're keeping this virtual space safe, welcoming, inclusive, content-based, and harassment-free for everybody. So make sure that you take a look at the code of conduct on the chat. And if at any given point during the conference you feel like the code of conduct has been violated, know that there's a process in place to be able to report it. There will be a cocktail hour at the end of the day where we're going to have themes that you can join to continue the conversation. Those themes include, we want to learn more about what you're building and sustaining conversations in your community, design system, who has them, how you support them, and like all virtual meetings that we've all been part of for the last year and a half, make sure that you leverage the chat and continue the conversation throughout the different sessions.
So really, why are we here? As mentioned, we're here. This is actually our 3rd Regional Digital Government Summit, and the past year has shown us anything. It's just how resilient, adaptive, and creative the public service can be when tasked with truly delivering at the speed of need. And today we've worked hard to create a space to hear from government leaders, to understand common challenges, and learn and fork great ideas. We'll hear from public servants from the province of Ontario, the state of California, the state of Georgia, and the province of Saskatchewan. And we've divided our afternoon to 3 major themes, which we think are really integral in shaping the evolution of the evolving role of government service delivery. Firstly, we want to go beyond digital service units, which we'll be hearing about in a moment. Secondly, we want to offer practical case studies in 2 streams of work that are integral and often overlooked in the context of delivery services that meet citizens where they're at, user research and content design. And thirdly, we'd like to actually go deep on a region, and we're going to learn about Saskatchewan's digital identity journey to date, what's going on as the 6th most populous province in Canada. Really, how is the province adapting practices of digital inclusion and equity? So with these 3 themes of discussion, I'm now going to hand it off to Angie to introduce our first session and moderator.
Thank you, Skaidra. So I'm excited to introduce you to Beyond the Digital Service Unit Session 1 as part of the Regional Summit here at Forward50. We're going to be actually having Annie Donolo moderating today's panel. Annie is a senior policy advisor at the Ontario Digital Service. She works in the Digital First branch and is currently focused on collaborating with ministry partners to advance the digital maturity of the Ontario government. Annie has extensive experience in strategic communications, legislative affairs, and media relations, and has held key positions in several ministerial offices of the Ontario and federal governments, including the Office of Canada's Finance Minister. With her today, she'll be joined by Krista and Nikhil. Krista is the Deputy Secretary of General Services at the California Government Operations Agency, which oversees procurement policy for the state. And prior to joining GovOps, Krista was Chief Innovation Officer in the City and County of San Francisco, leading the Office of Civic Innovation. Nikhil is the Chief Digital Officer for the state of Georgia, where he leads the Office of Digital Services, DSGA, under the Georgia Technology Authority. Annie, I'm kicking it off to you. Excited to hear this conversation.
Thanks so much, Angie and Skydra, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to kick us off with some questions and we'll get the conversation going. So Nikhil and Krista, many government digital transformation efforts start with building or fixing high-value public-facing digital products. And internal process reform and digital capacity building often take a back seat, but are key to an organization's digital maturity in the long run. So how can public servants help build and sustain momentum for the less sexy yet very foundational behind the scenes transformation that's required? Nikhil, do we want to start with you?
Sounds good. Yes, happy to. No, this is really a good point because in our conversation circles we call it like, are we planting the sunflowers or are we planting the oaks, right? Because for the larger, longer term, the processes and the internal organizational changes that need to be put in place for a sustainable digital service delivery is equally important. Now, sometimes what we have seen is a service really needs some immediate fixing, and that's kind of like where the SWAT teams go in and they try and fix the service itself. But then once that is done, like what do you take back and then reflect in the organization is really kind of like the important issue. And yeah, absolutely. From like creating a culture to hire the new talent, to procuring, the needed technology, or partnering with certain vendor partners, depending on what the organizational appetite is or what their overall culture is. I think that's a larger issue to, really kind of be looking at from a sustainable perspective, because, we can't be just constantly putting out fires. At some point, I don't remember who did this, but, someone had talked about digital services teams or the digital transformation is not a firefighting team. It's more a structural setup, that involves putting in sprinklers and like all the things to kind of manage the future fires.
Amazing. Krista, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I loved everything you said, Nikhil. And I think just to add to that, I think one place to start is just to start with the pain. Shared pain points are sort of the foundation for strong buy-in. And so if you can really take the time to understand sort of the nuances behind the pain points that people are feeling around these structural issues, then I think you have a reasonable, at least motivation to improve. And you have a starting point and kind of an ability to build some coalition. And particularly for some of the kind of big picture structural things, everyone complains about them and there's a lot of groaning about them. But there isn't a lot of sort of enthusiasm around improving them. And so I think one thing is really around mindset, and how do you bring sort of a mindset of curiosity and enthusiasm around fixing things that everyone around you is just groaning about. And so that's kind of just this, I think, a starting point. But then I also think it's kind of thinking about how do you tie the change to something that maybe is more immediate and is maybe more of either a fire or an urgent thing or an administration priority. So it's really kind of thinking about understanding what are the priorities for the administration and how can you move the needle on the structural thing while still serving a goal of the administration. I think you also need to build community around it of people who actually care, because this work is really hard, and it does take a long time, and it requires resilience to challenge the status quo and to be constantly faced with people who don't want to change or faced with constraints that feel impossible. So I think building a community of people who, with shared interest, building communities of practice that are exchanging ideas and finding precedents that we can all point to and learn from, I think is really important. And then finally, just as I said, these are long-term things. This is long-term change. But if you can identify ways to show quick success, or maybe you find a project that's already in flight that you can sort of attach a certain set of principles to, or you can kind of wrap around and support, then I think that can be a really effective strategy to kind of dealing with these things that seem like they're impossible to solve and completely kind of stuck in their ways.
That's awesome. I love your idea of tying big change to kind of putting out the immediate fires as a call to action. Do you have any examples, Krista, of when that approach has worked well for you in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first thing that comes to mind is my work at the city of San Francisco. So I was previously Chief Innovation Officer in San Francisco. And one of the things we did a couple years into our kind of the trajectory of our team was to, we were one of the first innovation teams in the country. So there really was no, at a city level, city government level. So there was really no blueprint or roadmap. But what we did a couple years in was we asked the mayor, what do you want your innovation team to work on? Because we had been sort of, being very opportunistic, working with willing partners, doing really good, impactful work. But there was a lot of sort of lack of understanding, I would say, around the rest of the city and the city leadership around what we were doing and how these innovation methodologies and toolkits could actually solve problems that mattered to them. So by getting sort of the mayor's support, at the time he asked us to work on clean, safe, livable communities. So it's nothing to do with technology or innovation, but by having that lens that we then went to the department leadership with, we could say, hey, the mayor wants us to work with you on clean, safe, and livable communities. What are problems in sort of those spaces that you're struggling with? And rather than asking them to kind of figure out what we can do for them in terms of technology, digital, or innovation, it was more about just letting them talk about their problems and us coming in and saying, oh, hey, this sounds like a data analysis problem, or this sounds like we need to kind of build up a service. So it was more sort of, I would say, relying on people's strengths in the organization to make an impact versus kind of pushing innovation on someone.
Nikhil, I'm wondering if you have any experiences of your own that kind of shed some light on this as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with what Krista said. Innovation cannot happen in a vacuum. Like, you have to be around problems and not just be around problems, be in the trenches with them and understand what's the actual issue. And that's really kind of like where most of our digital services team spend their time, is with in our case at the state level, maybe be a Department of Revenue or Department of Labor. What is it that they are actually facing as a challenge, and then what can we do in the immediate future and what can we do for the longer term is really kind of what we have been doing. And us being a central team, it kind of gives us that swivel chair, if I may, to be like, okay, if this department is facing this issue, then I'm pretty sure these other departments are. And just because they are not being vocal about it doesn't mean that they're not. And then we have seen that a lot of times when we actually go and work on a certain thing, we are able to apply that to across the organization. One of the examples per se is that we were working with our Department of Human Services on a child support app, and we were working with an external vendor partner, and like our role really was to test it out before they launched it. And when we actually started testing on real users, like we just went to one of the locations for the child support centers and just requested people to spend 5-10 minutes to just use this app. And we had one camera on their fingers on the screen, one camera looking at their faces, and then we mapped that experience of them going through that app and like how they were reacting to it. I mean, that was just absolutely telling in how someone would consume your product. And then we took it back, and of course, it had to kind of go through a lot of changes. But that really helped us kind of create a format, create a certain framework for like. Then we started looking at other applications, other services, and we were like, no, we gotta have like such a user-centric approach. And now today, it's pretty common knowledge and common sense. I'm talking about like 10 years ago, when user-centric approach or like just user testing was still an afterthought. So I mean, back then this was innovative. Today it's pretty much part of the process, but that's really what innovation is. Like at some point it feels like innovation, but then going forward it just becomes part of your process of doing something. So yeah, I mean, it's just like we try and fix something and then something else comes up.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about spreading the gospel of user research across your jurisdiction, but I wonder, what are some other levers that you've turned to advance digital maturity across your enterprise, whether it's hiring or retraining or procurement? What are some of the things that you're really leaning on to build that capacity in the long term? Kristen, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you hit on the two that I am most passionate about, hiring and procurement. And the reason I really kind of try and focus on those as much as possible is because hiring is all about people. And this work of government, I think, is all about people and having the right people. Anything is possible if you have the right people in place. And so for me, that's so fundamental to any of this change, and not just the sort of digital focused hiring, but also just hiring across the board and hiring people who are bringing in new perspectives constantly and are bringing in new skills and have different sort of backgrounds, just lowering the barriers for us to kind of have a government that is really reflective of the people of our state, I think is so critical. And also hiring and procurement affect every department in every government, in every city and every county and every state and everywhere across the country and the world, are all impacted by the ability to hire good talent. And so that's, I think, one big one. I mean, the other one that I personally have focused a lot of my most recent career on is procurement. Again, it's one that affects every single department and affects, every service that we're providing, is our ability to kind of buy the things that we need to deliver service to our residents. And the rules of procurement set how billions of public dollars are spent. And so if you can really shape how those are formed in a way that's both they're easy to use and they're equitable and they're accessible and they're opening doors for all kinds of companies to partner with the state, then you can really make the work of government more impactful and more efficient and equitable for people.
Yeah, Nikhil, what's your take on that?
No, I absolutely, I want to second that. And hiring and people really are like the two arteries, right, of like any organization, because end of the day, given everything that we do, we really are solving people's problems. And there are people on the other side who are trying to solve that problem. And there are people on, the other side who are trying to consume those services, who have problems. But the only thing is like, we're trying to solve those problems with technology. And when we understand what we're trying to solve, I think it becomes a lot easier. But having, the benefit of hiring the right people is critical, because you can't have the wrong, mindset in the way you're trying to deliver services through technological solutions. Because, and I mean, we've seen where like some of the government procurement teams, and again, they do a great job with everything that they are equipped with, but the times are changing too fast. They're changing completely with a pace that it's very hard for someone to keep up with. From a technology perspective, when you're an expert in procurement, when you're an expert in legal, like right now, I'm having a very hard time trying to explain why I need to be subscribing to about 40 or 50 different services, which are probably a pretty low dollar service. It's about, 10, 15, 20 bucks a month, rather than me cutting, a big check to someone in form of a PO. I mean, I'm just being more, I guess, aware, a good steward of public funds. But from a procurement framework that was set in a different age, there are certain issues that come in place. Now, what happens is services kind of get delayed or suffer. But having said that, I'm just basically talking about what I've seen as a culture. I'm actually pretty lucky to be working with people that are agile enough to really understand what I'm trying to tell them and figure out a way for us to work forward. But have to have the right kind of people. And again, like I feel like federal government, with the kind of newer skill sets, a lot of people find it sexy to work for that. For example, like White House and all the PIFs and some of the digital services up there. I'm not quite sure about the cities, but I mean, at a state level, I really have a hard time trying to find those new skill set, modern skill sets.
Can you just put a finer point on what kinds of skill sets you're really looking for?
Sure. So let me tell you, like my most recent search for the last few months has been, I'm trying to find a few product managers and product owners, right? Because what we are trying to do with the service delivery is we are working in a way that, we treat each service as a product. The way, we need someone to take ownership of how we deliver, how we test. Can't find any. It's been months, and then after I find someone, of course, some other private sector steals them. But again, that's an ongoing challenge for government organizations. This is not new, and this is definitely not unique in my area. But I guess the key is like we really need to find those people who have that service mindset, and staff our teams with the updated talent. Because at this point, a project manager who is a rock star in Waterfall is no value to me and my teams, right? I need someone who has the Scrum experience and Agile experience, and these are the things that we need to constantly be working with our procurement teams, our HR teams, to update the kind of people that we are looking for. So I think having those people and having an appetite for an organization to rapidly change and adjust to all these changes, I guess that's kind of like really needed. And really that, drives down to like, is the leadership, in place to make that cultural shift?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy you're talking about the culture change required, because that is where I was going to go next. There's, a lot of the things that we're talking about today, service design, multidisciplinary teams, user research, rapid prototyping. These are not things that necessarily come naturally to government, and do require definitely a change in mindset. As you said earlier, Krista, bringing kind of like the curiosity and enthusiasm to these problems. And I'm wondering, if you can think of any examples of, where you've tried to kind of promote culture change in a way that brings people along, because of course, so often that's really the challenge. Krista, is there an example you can think of?
Yes. So, I think what the big picture is, how do you kind of integrate these innovative techniques into the institution as much as possible? So going back to sort of what we were talking about earlier, and aligning with kind of executive and strategic objectives, kind of creating air cover for people to do things differently. So sort of really creating space for experimentation and setting expectations from the very get-go, not just with the people doing the experimenting, but with their bosses and with the financial, the budget people, and everyone involved should know that, this is we're going to probably fail on the first time, but this is the process that we're going to be going into, and here are the expectations on how it will take place. The program that I led in San Francisco is called Civic Bridge. It's a partnership program where we basically created 4-month sprints, discovery sprints, where we brought in partners to kind of tackle a specific city department challenge, and then kind of created that space. We had to set expectations around time commitment from both sides, for the department and the partner. And it was lightweight, right? So it's 4 months time. It's enough to actually get something done, but not too much time, that it's not too much to ask from, a department leader, with a really huge potential upside of bringing huge innovation and basically new thinking into their department and culture change. So I think a lot of it is around, how do you create structured ways to engage on some of these things, so that people kind of feel safe in the change. I think innovation and change can feel there's a lot of uncertainty. So, and that's okay. But how do you remove uncertainty wherever possible and create structure, whether it's through a program or a partnership or, a competition, that really helps to kind of enable people to experiment within some, within the sandbox, so to speak.
I see a lot of nodding from you, Nikhil. You want to jump in?
No, I mean, I definitely want to echo, what Krista said. The culture really in government, and I've seen some shift happen, but it really kind of went from not wanting to fail at all. And that's kind of like when, the procurement happens, really, we expected the vendor partner to deliver something maybe a year later and know exactly what, that's going to be, right? And that's just not possible. And when we shifted to a culture of having sprints and trying to test things out and building MVPs, I feel like, the overall appetite for failure was something that leadership was like, okay, it's not like a big launch and then it blows up. It is something that we constantly work on. But that's also a cultural shift, because a leader has to agree to that. And in most cases, what I've seen in procurements is like, we are looking for someone who has done this somewhere else. Need not be recent. It could be 10 years ago, but we need someone who has done this before, and we need them to do exactly what they've done before. But it could be a state with a completely different demographic, completely different, scenarios of like where, there is no adjustment factor to what they have done there. So those things we really need to change from a culture perspective. And like I said, I see things are changing now. They just need to change at a much rapid pace than what we already are doing. One of the things I can tell you, like what we have done in Georgia recently, is we have updated all of our procurement contracts to have the vendors talk about what they have done in their development for accessibility and in developing products for users with limited ability. And we have the authority to do an audit by a third-party expert. So actually put some gates in there to make sure that they just don't agree saying that we know how to do this and they do something, but then we actually verify it. And, it took us a long time to explain to everyone like what that means. And yes, it is going to drive the cost up, but it is still worth the cost. It's not always the best thing to do is just to go with the cheapest option and then not have your product usable for a big majority of the population or the minority of a population. So these are like some of the things from a culture perspective that, like, as we get into more of a modern digital world, we are seeing that people are going from these large monolithic contracts with a singular agency and breaking down to more like a BPA or more, like a modular level. And then again, also with the hiring part, now I'm leaning more on contract resources because I find it very hard to hire FTEs, full-time employees with that particular skill set. So now we are getting a contract hourly person who typically stays with us for like 2, 3, sometimes 4 years. But now with full-time employees also, you probably can expect just that level of commitment. So I feel like everything is now moving into more agile, more smaller pieces that actually has like more fluidity. And I think the government culture really just needs to update itself to adapt to that change.
I'd love to add to that, Annie, if that's okay. So I feel like just building on everything Nikhil said, this is my favorite part about working in government is that we can steal each other's ideas, and that's like accepted because we're all working for the public. And so the more that those examples are created and shared, like it's worth its weight in gold in terms of demonstrating value and a business case for doing something differently. I think when you can show, an attorney's office that, hey, this government did it, and why don't we give their attorney's office a call and see how they kind of worked that out? That is so valuable. And so I think, it's what's important about kind of events like this, where we're all sharing and getting to know each other, but having those, one of the things I always say is like, just share templates. We're all, we kind of need to build more of a space for literally sharing RFP templates and job classification templates and all those things that are kind of the fundamental ingredients of doing this stuff. And it's something that, one of the projects I've been proud of to work on at the state is how we're updating our classifications for hiring out for new digital services skills. And it's something I can talk about because we just launched it a few weeks ago. And Angie, who introduced us, was a huge leader in that effort with the Office of Digital Innovation. And what makes me so excited about it is that as the state is sort of developing this procurement vehicle to hire product managers, user researchers, content strategists, agile coaches, other jurisdictions, other states can look at that and say, oh, hey, at least we have a starting point. If California did it, then maybe we can try it too. Mm-hmm. And even more than that, the local governments, it's actually a procurement vehicle that the local governments can use. So like legally, it's there for them. They can just go in and get it. So I think by creating these new tools and really sharing them and distributing them, we can help it's a very tangible form of culture change, where it's like we can talk about culture change all we want, but actually there's a lot of just like basic tools that we all need to do this work. And so we can help each other with those kinds of methods.
Absolutely. And I think it really goes back to, what you were saying at the beginning about building community, not only kind of within your own government organization, but also more broadly, because so many of these problems and solutions are shared. We have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering before we wrap, if you can talk a little bit about how you imagine the digitally mature future of your organization and kind of what you think the key drivers will be to get there. Nikhil, do you want to give that a go?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really what I would say is I would love to see the organizations look at service design rather than just individual like applications and redoing something. It's like from the point that someone starts needing a service all the way to the point where like either they are done using the service or they subscribe to that service. And then everything that is offered to them really should not have any reflection of the organization. It could be one organization, it could be multiple organizations that are actually providing that service, and the citizen, the constituent, like, people should not have any reason to understand how the government machinery works in a way for them to consume that service. If we are able to make it that easy for them, because like one thing that we share with the private sector really are the people, right? Because they turn around and they use the Amazon and Apple services, and the level of sophistication that they are used to. Why should they lower their expectations when they interact with us? So if we are just able to provide it at that same level, I think that would be my ideal.
Yeah, I love that. I call the expectations question in government. We sort of have this crisis of low expectations. We sort of don't necessarily believe that we can do better. And so by having those examples and by setting a higher bar, what Nikhil is saying is looking at examples of how people are interacting in the world outside of government. I think that that kind of raises the level of what good is. I think that's a key thing, is we need to all kind of be more aspirational about what we can do as a government to make services more accessible and equitable. I also think it's building a common language across the entire organization around this work. I think for some of us that have been in this space for a long time, or long in the technology terms, we've developed a way of speaking, and that I don't think is necessarily shared across all of our colleagues. And so things like sharing articles, sharing videos, creating glossaries of languages, and really trying to make this work really feel inclusive so that everyone's involved in it. Because I think people often, once they get in these kind of circles, it's sort of like, oh, I'm not a techie. I don't know what you all are talking about. So how do you kind of shift that and make the digital work and the innovation work feel really inclusive, where everyone feels like they can actively contribute in a meaningful way to the conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for your thoughts today. Lots of great stuff that we got to dig into. I'm going to pass it back to Angie and Skydra. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.